Welcome to the iPhone 14 Pro review. So it's been a while since I last made a review, but I've been spending the last 2 months straight with the iPhone 14 Pro and I've really enjoyed my experience with it. Overall, to list the changes in comparison to last year, there were 3 main changes, and those changes being the cameras, the display, and the internals. To break that down a little bit, the display involves an always-on display, a brighter display, and that of course the dynamic island replacing the notch. And then to break down the cameras, well, some hardware changes to that we're going to get into. And then in terms of the internals, there's been a few more features such as car crash detection, but then of course the biggest change is the new processor, the Apple A16 Bionic chip. And with these 3 main changes comes a very similar experience to last year. So if you have an iPhone 13 Pro, it's not much of a change, but some slight improvements, but also some slight downgrades that I'm going to get into, or specifically one slight downgrade, and that for me was the battery life, but we'll get into that in a bit, even though the battery itself is larger. Now, firstly, in terms of the build and design, I don't want to waffle on too much, but basically same as last year: glass in the front, glass in the back, stainless steel edges, and one change which is different is this is a new color. It's called space black instead of space gray. It's slightly different, you can kind of notice it, but it's nothing that dramatically different from last year's space gray, or graphite version is what they called it last year. But then the camera bump is also physically larger, so then you can't use the same case that you did for the iPhone 13 Pro for the iPhone 14 Pro because it wouldn't fit that larger camera bump. But other than that, in terms of like physical changes, in terms of the case of the phone, nothing else has changed. I personally really like the size of the iPhone 14 Pro in comparison to the Max, which I think is too big. Whenever I get an iPhone, I tend to go for the standard size instead of the Max version. It's just the perfect size to use with one hand, I think. But in short, if you like that flat boxy design of the iPhone 12 Pro, the iPhone 13 Pro, then you'll like it with the iPhone 14 Pro. It's the same kind of thing. I personally really like it. But anyway, build and design aside, now I want to talk about the display and the changes that have come with that. So firstly, starting with a pretty basic thing, it's a brighter display. That's good to see. That means in direct sunlight, it will push it further to that extra limit just so you can see it better in the sun. And that is noticeable. It is true. It is better in the sun. It is a brighter display when it needs to be a brighter display. And then of course a new feature, which they could have added to the other phones by the way, but they've just made it exclusive to this iPhone, and that is the always on display. This is something Samsung and other Android phones have had for years, something I've always liked. It's where the display is always on to show the time. And on Androids, they typically just make it a black display with just the time showing so that they can save as much battery life as possible. But Apple have taken a slightly different approach where they basically keep the entire lock screen visible, but just lower the brightness by quite a bit. Of course, Apple wanted to do it slightly differently so they didn't get accused of copying Android, but I don't think this is a situation where they should have tried to differ, because by the looks of it, it hasn't done the battery life any favors. You have all your notifications showing, you have the whole lock screen, you have your wallpaper all showing. So I think with time, and I think it does affect the battery life because the battery life isn't as good as it used to be on the iPhone 13 Pro. I'm going to get into that in a bit, but several display things do kind of tie in with the battery life. And one of those things being the always on display, having that lock screen constantly on is bound to affect battery life. That other thing that Apple have done is they've made the display an adaptive display. Now basically meaning that it will adaptively automatically change between 1 Hz and 120 Hz whenever you're using it to try and save battery life. So say you're looking at a static image, it's going to drop down to 1 Hz so that it saves the battery. But then when you're scrolling through the lock screen, scrolling through Instagram, anything, watching a video, it bumps right back up to 120 Hz so that you can get to use that 120 Hz as it should be used. This isn't something that you're going to notice. This is something kind of just, it does in the background, kind of secretively, to try and save battery life. But that hasn't seemed to have done the battery life much of a favor, because even though the battery is now bigger than last year, it's a 3200 mAh battery in comparison to a 3100 mAh battery, it is actually worse battery life that I'm getting. It definitely doesn't last a full day. It would probably, say I start using it at around 7:30 a.m. It would probably die by around 7 p.m. with like mediocre usage. It's not really that heavy usage. which is unfortunate, especially considering the fact that there's a new processor, being the Apple A16 Bionic chip, a 4nm chip, and a big part of what you hope the processor would do with every new phone that comes out is help the battery life while keeping the phone speedy and stuff. But this isn't a problem that we was having with the A15 Bionic. The A15 Bionic was already really quick, so something you would really want to see it shine in is helping the battery life live longer, but it hasn't really done that. But anyway, back to the display, and the biggest change we've seen with the display, and the biggest change we've seen this year even, is the dynamic island. It's the replacement of the notch at the top of the screen. It's that black pill which has been integrated into the software to become a software feature. I think this was very, very clever of Apple, kind of turning a negative, being that pill taking up screen space, and then turning it into a feature that's actually somewhat functional. At first I thought it was pretty cool and it added to the user experience, but I thought it was also slightly gimmicky, like it's not going to do anything that I would really need or want, and it's not a need, but it does actually help. A quick summary of what it is it's basically this interactive little pill of information at the top of the screen, which changes depending on the apps that you're using. So say you've got a timer going, the timer hops right into that pill at the top, and it constantly shows you how much time you got left in the timer. Or say you're playing music, it's showing you the song, it's showing you how far into the song you are, and if you hold on to it, you can open up more information and make some changes to that. So if it's a timer, you can stop the timer, reset it, or if it's music, you can play, pause, skip, go back. And then other apps have their own little version of what goes into the pill in the dynamic island. And to be honest, I actually do end up using the music feature quite a lot. Instead of having to open up the app every time you want to control your music, it's really quick to just change it from the dynamic island. It's a nice feature. Obviously not a necessity at all, but definitely something I would say I'm happy to have. And then on top of this, from a design perspective, for me at least, I just think it looks better than the notch by a lot. And it's the best thing I've ever seen a company do with any kind of cutout on the screen for the camera, the way they've embraced it, especially the fact that Apple need to kind of keep it relatively large because of that Face ID technology having to fit in there. They can't just make a tiny little hole. So the way they've embraced it, I really like. Maybe a little bit of a nitpick would be it doesn't necessarily make sense to me that, say you want to control your music straight from the pill, that if you hold on to the pill, that's when the pill expands so you can make some changes. Whereas if you click on it, it will open the app. I feel like it should be the other way around. You should click on it to open up the pill and then hold on it to open up the app, because that will take you deeper into it, and that's when you want to actually put more effort in to open the app, whereas you kind of want access to the dynamic island to just be something quick. So that should just be a press, but I mean, it's not a big deal at all. Also, something you may have seen going around, especially when the iPhone first came out, is the fact that it's actually two separate cutouts. It's a circular cutout and then a pill cutout next to the circle, and they're joined together by software. And you'll never see them separated in terms of software. They're always going to look like one pill, but you can kind of see the separation if you're holding it in sunlight, especially at a particular angle. So that's just an interesting little thing there. But I mean, that's not anything that should be on anyone's mind. Now, in terms of other internal changes, you may have heard about the car crash detection, which I mentioned earlier, and this is a new feature that I imagine has something to do with the A16 Bionic as well, helping out with that, where it basically combines all the different technology inside the phone to try and tell whether you're in a car crash or not, and then it will call the authorities in the case that you are. It probably combines different things like the gyroscope, which tells how the phone is moving, with the microphone to listen for sounds in the camera, which would probably then trigger the camera once it starts to suspect something, and things like that, and then it will make a conclusion. But interestingly, I've heard that this has been set off on roller coasters. So obviously this isn't a full out 100% feature. I don't know if Apple have fixed this yet, but you may have heard that going around. But anyway, I think it's a nice feature to have in a case that you need it. Hopefully you won't though. On top of that, there's also the satellite feature, where it connects to satellite no matter where you are in the case of an emergency. Also another feature I'd hope you wouldn't have to use, but I think it's a really, really cool and convenient feature to have, and the sort of feature I'd like to see on every phone these days. Though my understanding right now is that it only works in specific countries. Now, for the third biggest change that I mentioned that most people tend to be interested in who watch these sorts of videos, though a change that the average consumer doesn't necessarily care about, are the cameras. Now, something I quickly want to highlight is if you're not someone who cares about the cameras, then there's not really any point in going for the 14 Pro when you can just go for the 14. And that's kind of what separates the two. The emphasis on subtle, more niche details like the camera. Niche consumers who are interested in getting the best camera possible, and that's what you're going to find here. There is a pretty big difference in terms of last year, in terms of what they've done with the cameras, and the biggest change is the change from a 12 megapixel main camera to a 48 megapixel main camera. That means it's 4 times the resolution, and with that comes a number of features. So of course, the most obvious feature with a camera which is 4 times the resolution, you are getting photos which are 4 times the quality. So more detail, more information in that photo, and that's always a bonus for very obvious reasons. But another feature is that main camera now acts as a replacement for the 2 times telephoto camera, because if you're zooming 2 times on that main sensor, you're still getting a 12 megapixel photo as you would have before, so you don't need to add that extra camera in order to do that. And then that means that the 2 times telephoto camera can be replaced with something a bit more useful, like the 3 times telephoto camera, which they replaced it with. So now you're getting more versatility, more zooming range. You're getting a main sensor, you're getting a 2 times zoom, you're getting a 3 times zoom, and you're getting an ultra wide. Whereas before, if you'd cropped in 2 times on the main camera, you would have lost a lot of quality. And aside from that, just for your information, the 3 times telephoto camera is 12 megapixels and the ultra wide is also 12 megapixels. But I'm not going to get in massive detail in terms of the camera and the footage and the video and all of that, because there's much better videos that really go in depth into the camera performance of the iPhone. But this is just to give you a general idea of what's improved and why. But to conclude, overall, I really do like the iPhone 14 Pro. As an overall package, as an experience, it's nice. It's the top tier iPhone experience. But in terms of value for money, that's kind of where you start to have a question mark, because the iPhone 13 Pro, for example, is still a very good iPhone. The only changes that really matter are the slight camera changes and the dynamic island instead of the notch, which for a lot of people is not enough of a reason to spend a large amount of extra money to buy this iPhone. So unless you care about the camera, and I do like the camera changes here, but unless you care about that and you care about the dynamic island, then it's not worth it in terms of value for money. You have much better alternatives like the iPhone 13 Pro and the iPhone 14. But regardless of that, if you just want the best iPhone that there is and that new iPhone experience, then this is the one that you go for. And that's kind of all I have to say. Anyway, thank you for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and give this video a like and comment for the sake of the algorithm. Check out my Instagram at El-Naggar for behind the scenes perspective and information on like where these icons on the screen are from and how you get them. All of that, Instagram, description, it's all there. Anyway, I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Salam.